So thanks for these introductions. As Mac, Priscille, and others already said, I'm the new PhD student, joined recently to support the second global survey and also other research components around my PhD that are related to the global survey. So while I was not closely involved in the first global survey, I'm happy to present its results today and also give you an insight into plans for the next launch of the second version of this survey. So, let me go first to the findings from the first global survey. You've heard already a lot about the idea of the survey, about its background, about the relevance of the survey. I don't want to repeat everything you've heard so far yet, but just to stress again the importance of the survey to serve as a tool to capture, for the first time ever, the perception of organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs, about their participation with governments, with the UN, and with funding agencies on a global scale. And it should also serve as a monitoring tool to really monitor how the Articles 4.3 and 32 of the UN Convention, UNCRPD, that was introduced by Delia and also Priscille, is really implemented in sense of the motto, nothing about us without us. As Priscille said, persons with disabilities and their organizations were for a long time not considered in international cooperation. And therefore, this is a very relevant tool to really make sure this is captured and also improvements can be monitored well. It will generally generate more robust evidence and also learning on what works already when it comes to participation of persons with disabilities and OPDs in international cooperation, and also what are the gaps to ensure meaningful participation. And I will now go to showing a little bit what the survey understands as meaningful participation, which is not simply being present, being informed, but which has many more dimensions of participation. So speaking about meaningful participation, the survey looks at different dimensions. First of all, it looks at the groups of persons with disabilities that are consulted, that are participating, that are making an impact in those international processes. It looks at the different constituencies involved, so the different members of IDA represent different constituencies of persons with disabilities. And it really wants to see at who is involved and who is not involved yet. Also, it looks at the dimension of whom are the people they are involved with, which decision makers engage with persons with disabilities, both on side of the governments, on side of the UN, but also on side of funding agencies overall. And when it comes to governments, it looks at governments on local level, on global level, on regional level, on national level, on regional level, and then globally it looks at the work with the UN. Where does participation happen? Again, just repeating local, global, national, and regional involvement. And also on which thematic areas? Is it only involvement on issues directly connected to inclusion, to persons with disabilities? Or do persons with disabilities get involved in all aspects of international cooperation and in all areas that have an impact on their life? It also looks at how accessible is or how does the participation happen? Is it accessible? Are the preconditions there that are needed for organizations of persons with disabilities to ensure meaningful participation? Are there many barriers? Are provisions provided for reasonable accommodation, for adjustments, funding, and so on and so forth? It also looks at when participation happens. So does it really start right at the beginning? Or are organizations, OPDs, maybe only informed at the end about changes happening? So really looks at the stages of the policy or program cycle when the OPDs are consulted. Also looks at how often participation is happening. Is it a frequent thing or just happening occasionally? And how formalized is it? Are there formal ways of participation, formal ways of involvement, or just informal ones, or both? Not to say that one is always better than the other. So just looking at analyzing which are the mechanisms in place and how much are they, to which extent are they really involved, as mentioned beforehand. So looking at the full scope of participation from information to full co-decision in changes. And last not least, how effective, and that's what Priscilla also mentioned beforehand, are the views of OPDs considered? Do they make an impact through their work, through being considered effectively? So these are the full dimensions of meaningful participation the survey looks at. And I would now like to show you a little bit what were the results, who were the respondents, and what were the learnings from this first global survey. So looking at respondents first, it was implemented in 7 languages, translated into Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, Spanish, and International Sign. And the overall questionnaire was created in a plain language version to make sure that most of, or that a wide group, as wide as possible, could understand the questionnaire right from the beginning. Speaking about accessibility, this is also an important dimension. 573 OPDs responded, so organizations participated in the survey, and they came from 165 different countries across all regions. The graph on this slide shows that 33% of the respondents came from European countries and 29 from African countries, forming the biggest groups. But also Asia was represented very well with 23%, followed by Oceania, North America, and South America, all by 4 to 6%. A majority of the respondents work at the national level. So the survey also analyzed the level which the organizations are mainly supporting international work or development work, in other words. So most of them work at, majority works at the national level, but also many work at local level and some at regional and global level. The survey was implemented with an online tool. SurveyMonkey was selected, and not going deep into frustrations as Meg said, but that was also showing some limitations when it comes to accessibility. And when looking at the learnings and plans for the next survey, I will say more about that. Key findings overall for all stakeholders were that, yes, participation of persons with disabilities through their representative organizations is increasing overall. However, their participation remains still insufficient. When looking at the standards that are set by the UNCRPD in the Articles 4.3 and also in the General Comment 7, which is accompanying that article, the standards are much higher than what could be found through the global survey. So while this is generally a positive result that participation is increasing, still a lot can be changed and improved. The participation of persons with disabilities is also not equal across the diverse constituencies of the disability movement. So there are still organizations that are consulted better than others. There are also intersections with other features of human being that are showing here. So namely, I would like to stress that, for example, women with disabilities, indigenous persons with disabilities are still left behind more. And also persons with psychosocial disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, with deaf blindness, or persons who are deaf are not consulted and included in decision-making processes as other groups are. At the level of decision makers, it's also a significant barrier that there is still a lot of accessibility, lack of accessibility, and also, as I mentioned beforehand, reasonable accommodations, so adjustments to make sure participation can happen, is not provided consistently and sufficiently. Also, poor attitudes of decision makers when it comes to awareness for disability and the needs of persons with disabilities can be observed. And some of the respondents stated, for example, that the decision makers are the biggest barrier for participation. And also a lack of knowledge, as mentioned, on what is needed can be observed. At the level of OPDs, financial constraints remain also a big challenge and barrier for participation. And also provided support from decision makers and funding for the organizations overall and for their participation is not guaranteed consistently and sufficiently to really support meaningful participation. However, 32% of OPDs report, and that's also something, that their funding increased or increased a lot compared to 1 year ago, compared to when the survey was implemented in 2018. So last but not least, the OPDs also report lacking technical and organizational capacity to get engaged. These are some of the constraints and key findings, but also positive results when it comes to findings across stakeholders. Looking at the findings on level of the government, key findings are that a majority of OPDs report that they are sometimes invited. So involvement of them with the government is still insufficient, in short, and across the stages of the government policy or the program cycle, the organizations usually do not participate, for example, in budget decisions. So 47% report that they are never, or 19% report that they are rarely consulted. Budget decisions is one of the fields where participation is hardly happening. And at the same time, overall, 42% of the OPDs consider their experience or engagement with the government as a poor or very poor experience, while 44% have a mixed experience and only 13% consider it as good or very good. So this draws not a very beautiful picture on participation of OPDs with their governments. Their recommendations are wide and look into different aspects of how to improve meaningful or guarantee meaningful participation, going from provisions and financial support to OPDs, as mentioned, to the demand for inclusion of all constituencies, all persons with disabilities, and also to a call for enhanced consideration for their views, not only inviting them to tick a box, persons with disabilities were present, but really to consider their views, to give them meaningful roles, and to ensure shared decision making and not just information at the end of the process. Also to ensure accessibility, reasonable accommodation, access and capacity development for OPDs. Looking at the level of UN and funding agencies, this was clustered as many organizations see also the UN as a kind of funding agency, and as some of the findings were kind of similar. So looking at this level of participation, 44% of the organizations, OPDs, reported being involved with the UN. And however, they are not familiar with the work of the UN overall. So amongst the UN entities, we asked which are the entities that are most inclusive ones. And the perception of OPDs is that UNICEF and UNDP are the most inclusive ones as of now. And a majority of the OPDs who engage with the UN report actually that their experience is positive. So 54% consider it as good or very good, and only 27% consider it as mixed, but also almost 20% as poor or very poor. So a very mixed picture, I would say. And OPDs engaged with the funding agencies report positive experience. So 66% were kind of satisfied with this experience. And they also appreciated that more or less access to funding, technical guidance that is necessary for policy change is provided. OPDs demand, however, also more and accessible information. So that was one of the big critical points about the work with the UN, that information is not always accessible, not helpful, that it's difficult to understand the work of the UN, and also that they wish more substantial and regular engagement with the UN, especially on disability issues, and also covering underrepresented groups of people with disabilities. So going back again to the finding that organizations or different constituencies are not consulted equally. And last not least, the UN is asked to have less centralized approaches and also to look more at the local level when working with OPDs. So this is it about the key findings from the first global survey. I'm sure there will be more discussion afterwards, maybe also on the panel. And when I would like to have a short outlook when it comes to the plans for the second global survey, where I will be strongly involved, much more than in the first one, where it just came when the report was written. So we want to learn, of course, from the learnings and from the limitations that the survey had, and transform them into hopefully positive improvements for the second launch. So when it comes to technical issues, we would like to really look at the limits that existed in the SurveyMonkey tool. And Priscille already mentioned that another survey tool is being developed in a more accessible way, that together with Precognition, that will help to address those technical limits we have perceived in the first global survey. Also, we would like to have a better outreach and use of the global survey than last time. So last time the survey was promoted mainly centrally through the IDA website. And this time this should be improved by really providing links to the survey through the web pages of the member organizations if possible, and to really make sure we address a wide range of different countries all across the globe, to have a more diverse picture at the end and to have more respondents overall. The accessibility issues that were mentioned briefly will be addressed through the new survey tool, also through relevant languages. But just don't want to go into detail, because that's a really interesting topic that we could dedicate a whole seminar to. But so some functions that were not there last time, but that they are necessary for different constituencies will be introduced and also considered upon drafting the questionnaire. And going to that one, we also made some changes in the questionnaire. We did some methodological choices to change certain things in comparison to the last global survey without losing comparability, as we want to monitor, of course, the process on the different dimensions assessed. But overall, we shortened it to a certain extent, as it was quite lengthy, introduced some new questions, especially on participation, because we wanted to make sure that we generate data also for a participation index that will be developed. That's another aspect of my PhD. And it also results or will result or be strongly connected to this global survey. And introduced some new filtering questions, or some new skip functions. So little things that will improve the quality and accessibility and robust data collection in the second global survey. Yeah, last not least, we hope that during data analysis of the second global survey, we will be able then to disaggregate maybe by country or type of constituency if we generate sufficient data, if we do a very good outreach, and if we get more respondents on board even in the next global survey, that would be great to really get more country-specific and constituency-specific data if possible. And also to look a little bit about, to contextualize a little bit more and consider the type of political environment in which OPDs operate. So next steps, as mentioned, is the launch of the second iteration of the IDA Global Survey. This is planned for end of March this year. And also the survey report just got published. So actually it's not anymore a next step and plan, but you can already find it online on the website of IDA. And a strategy for the dissemination of the results from the first survey and from the and a strategy for dissemination of the second global survey was discussed together with IDA. As mentioned, to really make very good use of the results of the first survey, and also to get many respondents on board for the next survey. The methodology is revised, as mentioned, and the only thing, I would like to stress again is that the development of an OPD participation index is planned. So while the plans are still ongoing, I don't go into depth on that, but this will be another tool that can be of very high relevance to map to which or the level of participatory nature which the organizations of persons with disabilities find in different countries and regions. So we will derive data from the global survey for that. And last not least, next steps are also really to improve the accessible data collection and mobilization when it comes to availability of the survey, technical improvements and language, as mentioned beforehand. So this is it from my end. If you have any direct questions, I'm happy to address them.